All right, you're very welcome back to the show. We've got a brand new series coming your way called Settle In, which is brought to you by Guinness 00. And I'm delighted to say that our first guest this week is Linda Gorman, an absolute legend of Irish football, a former international for Ireland and a former manager for Ireland as well. Linda, great to see you. How are you keeping?
I'm very, very well, thank you. As I age, I'm into my 70s now. I've never been as healthier and never played as much football.
Well, the obvious question that everybody's going to have as a result of that response is, what is the secret?
Just keeping fit, being on top of everything, particularly if you're injured, not sitting on anything, and actually being healthy and fit is a sort of lifestyle for me. It always has.
This is one of the things that we want to chat to you about. We will get into your illustrious football career before we finish this chat, but it is this question of being somebody who is included in society despite what age you are. That is a really important subject that we want to get across in this episode this week. And as a former sports person, this is something that you've been using to keep yourself part of society, keep social interactions up, keep your body taken over. Sport is not something that's a previous thing in your life. It's very much a current thing in your life as well.
Yeah, I've been involved in sports since I was 15 years of age, and all different types of sports. And I've never not been active in my life. We all thought that when our football career was over, that was it. I played into my 50s very competitively. And then when I was coaching girls' teams and schoolgirl teams and schoolboy teams, I was also participating, and I did a lot of different types of training just to keep myself fit, not only for my body but for my mental health, because as we get older and life struggles and sometimes it gets on top of us, going out, say, to do a cross training session or going out for a run is just brilliant for the mental health. And as we grow older, our mental health seems to suffer a little bit because we're no longer as productive or as active as we were when we were younger. So we have to find ways of adjusting and moving on in life as our age moves on.
How have you found ways of adjusting?
Well, COVID has been, for a lot of people, very sad, but it's been an eye-opener for me because I found my way back into playing football. I had been walking around my local park because I was working from home, as were a lot of people at the time, and couldn't get to the gym. Everything was closed. Walking wouldn't really do anything for my, say, mental health or my physical health, even though you try walk a bit. Even the running wasn't sort of doing it because it became monotonous. And I saw these group of people playing a match, and I thought, yeah, I could do that. I could do that. So as the weeks were going on, one Saturday, I was just so fed up. I went out into the shed, pulled everything apart and found my old boots.
Right.
And boots in hand, as I always did when I wanted to, say, train or play with the guys, would go up and say, who's looking after the team? And they'd say, oh, your man over there. And I'd go over and I'd say, can I have a game? And always the reaction was the same. Yeah, well, OK, but listen, don't worry if they don't pass the ball to you, and don't worry, because a lot of these people never saw women playing football and hadn't got a clue, how talented players are. And really, first touch, first pass, first tackle, if you can get these all right, and then reading of the game. And I was very, very lucky to have very influential people in my life, not only as coaching me, but also me when I was going to coaching sessions. So I think I was probably above average. And of course, as we age, we become more intelligent players.
Of course.
So that was my introduction. And of course, that opened a whole new world for me. So I then every time there was a new club or a new area that were taking on a walking football team, I'd always go up because I think I was the only one ever playing walking football. But now, very, very slowly, after maybe 3 or 4 years, we're now trying to get some women back into playing because there's a lot of fear in coming back into a sport.
So you put the boots back on, you find them in the shed in the pandemic. When were they last worn before that time?
Last worn probably about 15 years
Wow.
in serious play, about 15 years earlier.
Why did you put them away?
Because I suppose there was always this thing in my head, if I was coaching anyway, I would put on the boots because it depends on the ground. But I did have to go and buy a new pair of boots because my boots were so old that on one of the games, the sole came completely off.
Right.
So I did what we always did and what the guys do, just wrap it with tape until I got home and then ordered the pair online.
What pair did you order?
I ordered the pair from Sports Direct.
Right.
Adidas would be my type of a boot, but these are sort of all-weather type of boots. So I just whatever fit, and that was it.
I asked the question about the boots because I did wonder, was there a conscious moment in your life 15 years previous where you said to yourself, right, I'm putting them in the shed and I am now finished using them? Or was it something that subconsciously was your final day playing,
No,
and 15 years later you rediscovered, wow, it has been so long?
No, never, because I still have training balls, training bibs.
Right.
I still have stuff. I don't have as much as I used to have, but I still have all that stuff because you never know when it'll come in.
Yeah.
You know, and that was it. I never thought there was ever an end to my playing football, because when you're coaching, you get involved in little bits of stuff and you're doing demonstrations. And so, yeah, like everything else, you have to look the part.
So you discovered this game around the pandemic. This is walking football. Can you, obviously, it is what it says on the tin. The rules, I presume, are that you're not allowed to run in these games of football, or how does it operate?
Well, technically, it's walking football, no tackling from the back, no tackling from the side, no backing into players, no running. And technically, that's the way it's supposed to be. And then you have the different rules where you can only shoot or score inside the area.
Right.
Or you can score inside the opposition's half. You can shoot from inside the opposition's half, but not be allowed to go into the area. So there's lots of different rules depending, and they're quite flexible. But when I started off first, it was a little bit of running, you know. And then, as long as you don't sprint.
Right.
And then it depends on who you play with. Now, when we go into competition, we adhere absolutely to the walking football, which sort of changes things, because when I was playing football, I was always taught to put the ball ahead of the person so they're running onto it. But in walking football, the real thing is to play the ball to feet.
Of course. So it's actually subtly different to how you would have played the game beforehand.
It is. But then all the other stuff like control, passing the ball, shielding the ball, looking for play, being able to hold on to the ball, and then talking other people into good positions, that type of stuff still goes on. And then you have, you know, being able to shoot, you know, into goal and hopefully score a goal. But then with very, very good keepers, you know, very good keepers. And now there are different age groups. So with the men who I play with, there's over 50s, 60s and 70s. Whereas with the women, there's over 40s and 50s.
Right.
Only because there hasn't been that much interest in women's football up to now, walking football. But a lot of people are coming back. Like there's, in England, the Irish diaspora have the Republic of Ireland Walking Football Association. So we play like home country internationals. So you might play England, Scotland, Wales, Northern Ireland. You could play in those little tournaments, which are great.
And is that men and women in those international tournaments as well?
Well, it's separate men, separate women.
Right.
But as over 70s, and there aren't a huge amount of Irish over 70s, I play with the over 70s men.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
What was the biggest challenge you found when playing walking football for the first time?
Not running.
Not running, I can imagine.
Not running. Yeah, not running, because when you see the ball, you know you can make it. You've got this judgment that you know you can make it, or you know you get close and stop them from making a pass. So that was the hardest thing for me, and it still is. And I think it's the hardest thing for a lot of people, you know, because we all want the ball. We're all enthusiastic to win the ball. And sometimes there's some very head-to-head, like, tackles. You just ride them out.
Yeah, as long as they're head-to-head. One of the things that definitely occurs to me here, and this is a theme that pops up with any woman in sport that we speak to, is that their childhood is often spent playing with the boys, being whatever, one of the only girls on a boys' team up to a certain point. The way you're talking about it here, it feels almost like a full circle moment, because I presume in your childhood you would have played with the boys quite a bit until the women's team came along. And now at this point, when it comes to the walking football, it sounds like you're one of the only women playing on the team, or at least you were during the pandemic.
Yeah, when I started playing first, as with a lot of other players, we would have played with my brothers. I have 7 brothers, and with the neighbours and with my best friend, and we greens right beside us where I live. So we would have gone out there and played football. And if the lads didn't let us play football, every time the ball went out, we'd run off with the ball, you know. So we sort of grew up like that. And then the lamppost, sometimes it was a jersey, and sometimes it was a lamppost that was goal, you know. So you learned all the little tricks there and then. It was only when I became 15 when my best friend, Catherine Rafferty, she's my lifelong best friend, lived 2 doors away from me. She saw an ad in the paper where the civil service team were looking for players, and they asked people to go up to Ballymun. So myself and Raf went up to Ballymun, and we were picked. And when we went to our official pitch, was in the bogies in Cabra, they were all women. We were the only kids. So anyway, we stuck it out. Everything was great. And then just football just took off then. Huge changes.
What age were you at that point?
I was 15.
Right.
At that point. And these other players we were playing with were working in the civil service, so they were much older than we were. But it didn't really matter. You know, we just loved the game and wanted to play and wanted to be, you know, on a team, be part of a team.
Because it was such a normal part of your childhood growing up, especially given your brothers and playing out in the green and those games being such an important part of your childhood, did you feel the barriers that you were up against when you were a 15-year-old?
Absolutely not. We just lived life. And, you know, you have to remember, you're talking maybe into the 60s now, where there was a lot of changes for women. And there was changes in sport as well, you know, where previously the ban on the GA ban, which prevented players from playing soccer, that was beginning to change. I think that changed in 1970 or 71, somewhere around that time. No, didn't feel anything. We were very much accepted. My parents, and particularly my mother and the neighbours' mothers, they were all very progressive in terms of pushing us to do all the things that they weren't allowed to, you know. So that was great for us, and nothing was impossible. Absolutely anything you wanted to do, you could do. Play ball, jump on the bikes on the back of the bike with a guy coming down the hill, playing rounders. There was never just the boys or just the girls. We were always mixed.
Wow, what a brilliant culture at its time.
Fabulous, yeah.
And I guess it goes to show how important the role of the parent really is, that actually I presume in that era, not every set of parents, not every mother, not every father would have actually had the vision to say what's going on actually is a bit of in an equal society, or especially when it comes to sporting opportunities, whereas that was different for you. There was obviously people who kind of realised the girls should absolutely be out there.
Yeah, well, my father in particular was very progressive in terms of anything that women could do that men had previously done. It was like, this is fantastic. I remember him, he was a long-distance driver, but I remember him working for CIE and coming in one night and saying, "You're not so excited, you're not going to believe what happened today." And we were saying, "All right, I wonder what happened." A female first women bus driver. She's fantastic, you know. Whereas my father's probably coming from the World War II era, where the men went to war and the women started taking on the role of men. And he thought that was fantastic. And anything that women can do, they should be allowed to do. So that was very encouraging for us, you know.
Where do you think your father learnt that?
Probably life experiences,
right.
You know. And I'd say probably during the war, where women had to do men's jobs and could do them very, very, very well. And then when the men, those who came back from the war, took up the roles again, then women were relegated back down to where they were, and they weren't happy. And then with women's lib coming along, I mean, it opened up a whole new world for everybody. You know?
And would he have outwardly said this is not fair, what has happened since the return to the gender norms post-war? Would he have spoken to you about the fact that women are sidelined in sport, for example, or is it more subtle just in terms of his behaviours?
No, my father was very vocal because, as I said, he drove a bus, and of course everybody said, "Oh, see you, Mick. Thanks, Mick." And he said, "Do you know Linda's playing football? Do you know Linda's playing in Daily Mount? Do you know Linda's on the Irish team?" So everybody knew me before I even knew myself, you know. So he wasn't shy about being very proud of what we achieved. Not just me, but for my brothers and sisters as well. Not all of us played sport. But ironically, I have 3 other sisters. 2 of them played football.
Right.
Yeah.
So clearly your dad had a big part to play in that in terms of fostering that culture within the family.
Yeah, he did. And then my mother encouraged us because nothing was impossible.
Right.
You know.
That's absolutely phenomenal, that image of your father. At what point do you start to realise the barriers that do exist as a young woman trying to play football?
I never came across anything like that.
Right.
Because being forthright and going up and saying to someone, "Can I train with you?" or particularly the men's side or the boys' side, "Can I train with you?" And they were saying they didn't know how to answer, so they'd say okay. And then once you could prove that you could keep up, or you were enthusiastic, or you never gave up, that was encouraging for them as well. You know, we weren't as good, say at speed than the guys were, but we never gave up, and I never gave up. So that was sort of life for me, that there was nothing that you couldn't do, and there was nothing that anybody else said. If someone said you couldn't do it, you found ways around doing it. Like, without saying it, it'd be like, "Watch me."
Yeah.
You know.
You were obviously part of that pioneering group of women who played on the very first Republic of Ireland women's team. Can you talk us through the process in terms of making that happen? Was it a big movement where for a period of time you were thinking to yourself, it's ridiculous that Ireland doesn't have a women's team? Was it something that seemed very gradual and normal overnight? Do you remember what it was like before you eventually got that opportunity?
You see, I'm very, very lucky because around 1968-69, when RAF saw the ad and we joined the team, during that time, Jay's Fluid, which was a factory in Finglas, were very, very good to their employees, male and female, and they had women's sides, a women's side and a men's side, and that was sort of the norm up around where I lived, and that was normal for me. So my recollection of my first games were in Talca Park, and, you know, with the backing of men, that was just normal for me because my dad backed me, so I didn't see anything wrong or thought was normal for other men to back, and these were very enthusiastic people who wanted to promote, and Jays were very proactive because they saw the benefits of a social life or a social side to work for its employees. But I do recall with fond memories of 1971 was very, very significant in women's football because a lot of things happened. The first women's league was started, right? And the corporate sponsor, believe it or not, was Jay's
Right.
Fluid. And not only that, prior, I think 1970, UEFA mandated all its members to recognise women's football. So this was a way of sort of ticking a box. So we went, plus the Referees Association, who would never ref women's games, had to come on board. So prior to the first Dublin Women's League starting, there was an exhibition game down in Talca Park between Jays, who my sister played for, and my team, which was Civil Defence.
Right.
And that was sponsored by Perry Crisps, a company in Santry. And the the most significant thing about that game was an appointed official referee, and that's the first game that was ever refereed.
Right.
Took place that day. And I remember prior to the game being brought into a canteen in Jay's, and we were all taught or shown how to apply the offside rule.
Right.
Right. So that game was, the exhibition was, for me, did we understand the offside rule? You know, crazy. But that's the way it was, and that was the mentality.
So patronising.
Then. Well, we never looked at it like that, because life was changing for women in Dublin, and we were just getting on with it, and we were young, and we didn't want all the responsibilities. But how the international team came about was Jay's, he was supervisor in Jay's, who ran the women's side, was a guy called Pat Noon. And he was very much involved with a man called Kevin Gaynor from Dundalk, who was really into women's football and had formed relationships with the FA in England, the women's FA, the FA in England. But Pat Noon got in touch with a guy who managed Stade Reims team in France. And if Pierre was his name, Jeffrey, I think, was his last name. And they organised for us to go across to France and play 4 matches around France, really to showcase women's football in France. But I think to showcase on the back of mainly Stade Reims players representing France in the first Women's World Cup in 1971, Copa 71. So we had played against some of those players. And that relationship sort of kick-started for Pat Noon in the formation of the Ladies Football Association of Ireland. But things weren't moving because, as I said, the FAI had been mandated in 70 or 71, and nothing was happening international-wise. So he organised the game against Wales in May of 73.
Right.
And I only recall maybe one training session. And when I did eventually compare the first international game, which was away, to that game, which was home, at that time, I played for the League of Ireland. So I would have been playing all around the country. And Pat had been managing our side, which had amalgamated with Jay's and called Avengers. So Pat, if you look up the teams, all the teams in the first game away to Wales is an absolute true reflection of players from all over Ireland, because they were mainly picked from the League of Ireland, only picked from the League of Ireland team. Now, there was a league going on in Dublin, the Leinster Junior League.
Right.
Very instrumental. The Dorans, who were involved in Bows, were very influential in setting that up. And 2 very good teams came out of that. Anne O'Brien played for All Stars, and then the suffragettes from Finglas, who won the very first All-Ireland Cup in 1971. Right. And they only are up the road from me, and yet I ended up playing in Cabra. But anyway, Pat went ahead and organised the game, and we paid all our own fare. We always paid all our own expenses, took time off work. Some people might have lost jobs because they wanted to play. Off we head on boat and bus to Wales. Great reception. We stayed with some of the Welsh families over there, and I still have the letters that I got back and forth with the family I stayed with. A horrendous day, the game. About 3,000 people turned up. Probably what we would call today a game of 2 halves.
Yeah.
Hail, rain, winds, and we won 3-0.
Right.
And great. And Paula Gorham scored a hat-trick. Fantastic. So we all head home, elated. And nobody knew we were out of the country.
Oh, God.
Not a thing, nothing at all. So then that was in May. In June, the FAI got a little bit upset because this game had gone ahead without their sanction. So they decided that they wanted an input. Now, I'm saying this from my perspective.
Yeah.
So they organised trials, and one game, I think it was. And if you look at the team from the first game in Wales, the team from the second game a month later, they're mostly Dublin players on the second team. So you have Anne O'Brien had played on that team, and a lot of Dublin players, prolific goal scorer Joan Williams played that game, and one of the players from the Suffragettes who was called in at the last minute actually scored the fourth goal. So we beat them 4-0. So then in October of that year, officially we had a match against France in Parc des Princes.
Right.
And there's a little bit of footage of that.
Yes.
Coming out of the tunnel, fantastic. And then a month later, we played Northern Ireland again up in Lurgan. So that was fantastic. But I suppose the life-changing time for me was when Kevin Healy was appointed manager by the FAI. Because here we now have a guy who is very experienced coach, running the Bows second team, who was prepared to take us on. And the stuff that we learned and how he progressed our game as an individual and as a team was just inspiring. So I'll give you an example. Bows trained in Grange Gorman, and one evening he took the players up to, mostly were Dublin players, up to train with them. But not trained the way you would think it was training, running, sprinting, and all that. It was actually very tactical. So what he had us do was shadow play. So I played full-back, and I shadowed the full-back from Bows. And all the players did the same, shadowed. And it was phenomenal because when we played to the nearest player. But the way he was telling us was that you play and you move in relation to the ball. So if the ball is over here, you don't stay over there. You move in relation. So shadowing the players, the Bows players, and I happened to be shadowing Fran O'Brien, who was my neighbour.
Right.
And he was a left full. And that just opened up a whole new world. So those type of things that he did for us changed the way that we played. And it came through because when we played France, and it's the most memorable game that I know, although we had beaten Northern Ireland a few months earlier, 6-0, playing against France in Tulk Park in 1978 with a 0-0 draw, and myself and Bernd Cassidy being named players of the match. We were two fullbacks. Yeah. So we're named player of the match. It'll tell you the pressure we were under. Do you know what I mean? So, so that's how it sort of progressed on from there.
Oh, there's loads in that. Like, one of the things that you mentioned there, obviously, was the tour of Stade de Rez in Ireland around that point. And is that essentially how Anne O'Brien gets spotted? And that's how. Anne, I think we went to France in 1978. Right.
And we played over there in Stade de Reims. And there were two players they targeted. One was Kay Ramsbottom from Kilkenny. She was like a titan, so tall and really well built. And Anne O'Brien.
Yeah.
And and I suppose they kept their eye on Anne O'Brien, you know. And Anne was very brave because she did what none of us would do, you know, go across. Because you have to remember, I think my first time outside Dublin was going to Wales.
Right.
You know, so that would have been the same for all of us.
So rather than seeing it as this amazing opportunity that everybody would jump at, it was actually seen as a risk.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. And then you're leaving all your family. You don't know what you're going to. You don't know the language, you know. But Anne was very brave that she did that.
Right.
You know, I think that's my opinion.
Very different to today, obviously, where the WSL is on TV, for example, or women's football in the continent.
The world is smaller now because of flights and everything else. Whereas that time, you sort of got a boat, you know, and you know, you got a boat. Oh, Jesus, I think, you got a boat over to France, or I can't even remember whether we flew. I think we might have flown, but it was rare. And then you had to pay your own expenses.
Yeah.
Even up to that time, you were paying your own expenses. And if you got injured, it's just tough luck on you. My best friend, Raf, she got a really bad injury when we had our first training session for the home selection against Northern Ireland in June of 73. And I'll give you an idea. We were training in, that selection was in All Hallows in Drumcondra, and our bus stop was by the Botanic Gardens, which is a fair distance, and she had to hobble all the way through. I was carrying her all the way. I think we must have went about a mile and a half.
Imagine, yeah.
Yeah, and she never made the game because she was badly injured.
Right.
But she had to look after herself. Yeah.
And it is an interesting question to raise there in terms of the support that would have been there for you from the football authorities, because obviously you have your playing career, but then in the midst of all of that, the men's team is starting to go to all new heights. They go through the 1980s, they qualify for 3 major tournaments, and in that period you become Ireland manager. So 91, 92, if I'm not mistaken, is when you're Ireland manager, when the men's team is at its peak. So it's a very good time to focus on here as a reference point as to how you're seeing, you know, the scenes in terms of celebration, in terms of opportunity for the men's team versus what you're experiencing as the manager of the Ireland women's team. Was there a gap that you noticed that was completely unfair, bigger than you would have thought, and even allowing for the fact that it was 30 years ago, you still remember saying to yourself, this isn't right, the way the women's team is being treated versus how the men's team is being held aloft?
We were polars apart,
yeah,
in every sense of the word, you know, and given what past President Bernard O'Byrne said at a recent documentary, the FAI were not interested whatsoever in the women's football, and they left everything to the women's section. The women's section would not have had the experience nor the pull nor anything else other than being nodding heads to the FAI, you know. So the decision makers, in retrospect, when I've found out all this, although in my heart of hearts I knew it, as did a lot of other players, our own association was making rules about the women's game. The FAI were not to be seen. And even my appointment as manager, not one FAI official was there. Never seen an FAI official at a training session, never spoke to an FAI official, nothing at all, nothing at all. So, like everything else, we were not regarded. And I'll just give you an example. In 1983, I ran the Dublin City Marathon with Rose McCaffrey, Rose McAlorum, to raise funds for our association. I mean, what other player, never mind manager or anything else, ever ran a Dublin City Marathon to raise funds for the FAI? Because we didn't have anything. It's been all over the news since 2017 that where they changed the no facilities. I can go back to the late 1970s. We trained up in the Phoenix Park. That was our international training ground, the polo grounds in the Phoenix Park. My international training grounds were the old Sports Link grounds, civil service grounds up near the airport, and Fairview Park. What type of, organisation would allow its highest level of its players have or train in conditions? Now, you're talking nowhere to put your gear in up in Sports Link you had prefab buildings, maybe 4 showers for 20 plus players. Players had to make their way out. Country players had to organise that they get picked up by Dublin players and stayed overnight with Dublin players. And then, no food, not an FAI official at all to be seen. It was just very, very disheartening. The only highlight of that was that we beat Spain in Spain, and that record has never been broken, not by a men's team or another women's team since. And I put that down to my knowing every single senior player in the country, and also knowing the junior players, the up-and-coming players, because I'd played with all the players in the country, all over the country, in all cup games, league games, Bracken Trophy interleague competitions. So I knew what the good players were. But to play against a team like Spain, you had to have very skillful players, very, very skillful players, because technically they're very good. And having a blend of young players like Olivia O'Toole, I gave her our first cap, and then the older players like Sue Hayden, Angie Bates, and a few players like that sort of could settle the team down. So you had experience with new players, and it was the new players who brought the flair. Now, when I talk about skillful players, a very, very good centre forward for the team I played with, Angie Bates. Brilliant first touch, as hard as nails, very fast, very sharp. I played her centre half because if we were going to be bombarded with balls, I wanted someone who could take a ball down, be tricky and play a good pass. So it sort of worked out well for us there. But that success never really amounted to anything.
Right.
Because our home game, it was appalling the way we were treated by our own association, chicken and chips in a box in Dalymount Park, whereas the reception we got and how we were treated in Spain was just amazing. It was an eye-opener. An eye-opener.
One of the things as well, when we talk about this, Linda, is the grim revelations that we've had this summer as well. And I know that there is an investigation, there's a process ongoing, but I just bring this up at this point because in the documentary that aired on RTE during the summer as part of the joint investigation with the Sunday Independent, there was this very matter-of-fact moment where Bernard O'Byrne referred to women's football as just an afterthought. And the way you're describing things there in terms of how it was under your stewardship as manager, it feels like exactly that, just an afterthought. And in that environment of women's football being just an afterthought, there was a culture of unwanted sexual advances, harassment, and again, we'll wait to see how the process develops over the coming months, hopefully. But there was a vacuum here for safeguarding, for the right structures being in place, that you would have witnessed firsthand how badly let down the women were on the pitch. In the background, how they were being treated off the pitch was clearly appalling.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I mean, I know Bernard O'Byrne would have gotten maybe a lot of stick for what he said. I think he was very brave and very honest and said what we older players knew, past players knew all our lives, that the FAI had other stuff going on. Because I was involved in schoolboy football at that time, what Bernard said, he might have been referring to types of abuse that was going on in schoolboy football, which was all new and raising its head around the same time. At the same time, nobody gave any credence to appointing a male manager and male coaches to an all-women's team without any woman being present, any senior woman being present to oversee, that things were done right. And so it did not surprise me one bit when I heard what was revealed on that documentary. It didn't even faze me one bit. And it's very, very sad to say. Things have happened since, and I know it's been very quiet and about the two sides, because there seemed to be two different groups going on. There was one with the sexual abuse, and then there was the other one where you were punished for speaking out if you said anything. And then you have players who didn't want to be involved. And I know, hand on heart, and I've been told by players that I know and I played with, that they did not want to be part of the international team because they just saw stuff that was going on. And it was very obvious that was going on because there was an incident in the home farm when I was coaching the schoolboy side over there, that incidences had occurred in Home Farm after an international game that were absolutely appalling, and it should have raised a red flag. Should have raised loads of red flags, and I don't believe that people in authority didn't know. That's my own. I don't believe that for 1 minute.
Those incidences that you referred to in Home Farm, were they investigated?
Never. No. Dogs in the street knew about it. I wasn't even involved, and I knew about it before I even came down to the next training session with my team in Home Farm. Never mentioned to me by anybody in Home Farm. But, you know, I have very, very high standards, and I expect high standards and from other people as well. And maybe that's one of the reasons why I was successful, because maybe players didn't like me, but they respected me.
It's a desperately sad element in all of this. Not that the standards of facilities and the tools that you need to improve as a team, them not existing is obviously a sad thing as well. But what's happened here is, in the process of all of this, is that lives have been ruined and lives have been damaged as a result of this. Is there any comfort whatsoever in seeing what the women's national team have achieved in recent years, seeing an Irish woman in Eileen Gleeson as manager of the team? And granted, it's a few decades after you thought that things might have had a linear path towards equality with the men's team and with basic standards. Is there any comfort in the destination, at least? Because it's been a very, very rocky path for a number of decades.
Absolutely. But for me, the biggest change was during Vera Pauw's tenure.
Yeah.
Simply because she changed the perception of women's football across the whole of Ireland. The numbers of young kids that wanted to play football, wanted to be involved in football, was phenomenal. And that was all due to the visibility that she brought to the game, and the way she, to me, the way she conducted herself and the way she elevated certain players to be iconic, you know, and sort of symbols for up-and-coming young players. There's been an absolute huge change. Being really honest and a gut feeling, it might look that we have parity. I just have few doubts here and there.
Yeah.
And one of them that would cement how I feel was the government saying they will withdraw funding to the FAI unless they elected 2 female representatives that they had previously voted down as not being allowed onto their executive or onto their committee. That just, for me, just showed the world, particularly Ireland, that is there really parity there?
No.
Now, from my own experiences and from the things that have changed since the girls went to the World Cup or on the road to the World Cup, was that there was an interest in the history of women, because now the FAI, and I think it was an initiative by Gareth Marr, who was the communications manager for the women's team, to honour the 50th anniversary of the first game that lined up with the women going to the World Cup by giving a 50th commemorative cap to every single player, senior player who played. Now, having said that, I played 31 times. I never got a cap. So that was huge, absolutely huge. And the reception that the girls got after a little bit of hassle, because I'd been on both sides, I'd been with the men, I'd been with the schoolboys, and I'd been with the women, it was absolute parity. You couldn't have asked for anything more, really couldn't have. And I would say in the history of women, former women players, that would be one of the real highlights of actually getting a cap, acknowledging that you did play.
We began this conversation and your life story, I guess, by talking about the barriers that you experienced and the barriers that you overcame as a young woman trying to make it in football. What about the barriers that exist for those who are a little bit older, who want to continue to play football. Is that something you've ever experienced?
Never. Not with me, because, as I said, like, I really good parents who were very encouraging, and I probably instilled in me, as you know, that you can do anything you want and don't let anything stop you. There's ways around everything, and if somebody says no, don't take it as no, you know. And then I had great experiences with male football coaches and just ordinary male coaches and managers like Joe Swain, who helped me with Home Farm, and also Paul Ryan and Willow White with Sheriff Street, who they're just their experiences. So, to be quite honest with you, my experience with them drove me to really want to understand how the mind and behaviour works. And I took an honours degree in psychology, and I took a diploma in forensic psychology, because I wanted to know what makes people tick, and why does that person tick and this person not tick to the same, although they look as if they're the same. I can't remember the question you asked.
No, that's a very interesting response. It is about, I guess, to bring this back to what we started talking about, which was walking football, and how it gives people an avenue back into sport, which maybe wouldn't ordinarily be there. Is that something that is breaking down the barrier of age?
Well, what's really breaking down is, and I'm a living example of it, is that women can play with men in walking football.
True.
You know, so that's a huge barrier. But then we always played with men, and I mean, we would train with men because there weren't female players good enough to play with. And we were very lucky that we had schoolboy sides and men's sides that were willing to let us play. And I mean, it's a wonder that I'm not broken up in bits, have a broken leg or anything like that. But the guys you're playing with are guys who want to win the ball, but not to the extent as they would play against the men or the boys themselves. So although they'll tackle you to win the ball, they won't go through you to win the ball.
Very
if you
kind
know
of
what I
them.
mean? Yeah, so that's a compliment.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? I would take that as a compliment. So playing with the guys and nowadays, and I mean, you talk about women in sports. I have never seen such a surge in older women either taking up a new sport or, trying something new. I mean, when I would go to the gym, which I did maybe 2 months a year just to build up my physical strength, I'd be the only one down in the men's section. And I was so focused, I knew what I wanted to do. I'd just go down. I wasn't minding who was watching me or who wasn't watching me. Now, all the women are taking it up down in the men's section. They're all going to the gym, they're doing aerobics. I mean, even the gender-neutral sports that don't rely on physicality, like sailing and shooting and all that type of stuff, the world has just opened for women that I've never seen, never seen. And it doesn't matter. Age does not matter. What really matters is that you stay mobile, that being active in old age is supposed to stave off, all illness, a lot of illnesses and physical injuries that you have. I mean, it's gone the complete opposite. And people new to coming back, particularly to walking football, might have a little less confidence because not sure if they're going to get injured, not realising the mental lift that being involved in sports from a social aspect is so important as you get older. So important. I mean, we can all live our youth in our older years playing football because we're all on the same level now. Do you know what I mean? We're losing female hormones and the men are gaining the female hormones, so we're sort of on the same level.
One last question. Do you love playing football as much now as you did when you were lining out for the Republic of Ireland in the 1970s?
Oh, as much as ever. Because of how it makes me feel, think, in terms of it's a strategy. It's going out and looking at the team and looking at the player I'm playing against and looking for their strengths and weaknesses, and then looking at who they link up with, and then trying to counteract them at the same time, trying to be aware of what's around you as well. And it's a real, for the most part, it's a thinking game for me. It's just that sometimes it doesn't translate to the feet quick enough, if you know what I mean. But the strategy of it and the thought processes involved and the skills that some of the players I play with, oh my God, phenomenal skills.
Linda, it's been a pleasure chatting to you. Thanks so much for coming into studio. You've been listening to Linda Gorman, and Settle In is brought to you by Guinness 00